Thank you everyone for joining us on our third and final panel of today's convening on Indigenous leadership through the climate crisis. This panel is very near and dear to my heart. I've gotten to work with two of the amazing people on here, and I'm so excited for them to share their knowledge with you. And so I'm not going to talk too much about it. I'm going to let our moderator, Joel, take over, but I do want to introduce Joel, and I will do that now. It's too many. Yeah, okay. Wonderful. So your moderator for the third panel is Joel Chastain. Joel Chastain is a citizen of the Chickasaw Nation with Laguna Pueblo and Navajo Nation heritage. Joel has devoted his career to developing his experience and knowledge in Native American affairs. Over the last decade, Joel has held various positions in the governmental and commercial divisions of the Chickasaw Nation, and most recently worked with appointed leadership on strategic development initiatives. Joel left the Chickasaw Nation for 1 year to complete a fellowship at the National Congress of American Indians in Washington, D.C., advocating for tribal nations through analysis and support of public policy that advances tribal interests. Joel has a Bachelor of Science in Business Administration from Haskell Indian Nation University and is currently finishing his Master in Public Administration at Harvard Kennedy School, Harvard University Kennedy School of Government. And here's Joel. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And thank you guys all for joining us, everybody that's in the room here, and also everybody that's online. I am excited to be joined by an extraordinary panel who, all of them very bright and very accomplished professionals. I'm very interested in hearing their stories and their initiatives that they're doing there on the grounds in their Indigenous communities. So how we're going to split everything up, everybody that's online, as we're going to hear very shortly, introduce our panelists. Once the panelists, introduce the panelists, each panelist is going to have about 15 minutes to present. So during that time, if you guys have any questions, please use our Q&A session or there on Zoom to go ahead and post those. And then at the end of after we get done with everybody's presentation, we're going to then answer those, present those questions. So please feel free to engage. We also have a chat function too. So please feel free to tell us your name and where you're at. We'd love to hear from where everybody's joining us from. But with all that, to get us started, I'm pleased to introduce Karina Miller. She is the Columbia River Gorge Commissioner and has served in this capacity since 2019. She is a member of the Confederate Tribes of Warm Springs. She has a bachelor's degree in science and ethnic studies at the University of Oregon. She has served as the Wasco Tribe representative of the 27th Tribal Council of Warm Springs from 2016 to 2019. She is also the co-chair of the Energy Committee of the Affiliate Tribes of Northwest Indians, and also is the chair of the Native American Caucus for the Democratic Party of Oregon. Please join me in welcoming Karina.
Hello, I just want to make sure you can hear me. Can you hear me? All right, so this is where I just tell my story and talk about my experience, right?
Yes.
Okay, I want to make sure we're not doing instructions for everyone. Got my timer set, so hopefully you guys don't have to cane me off the stage. Sorry, I'm getting over a cold a little bit, but I'm really excited to be here and honored to be on this panel among these other amazing tribal leaders throughout Indian country. Thank you to the moderators and the organizers for getting this together. I think these are really important conversations to be having. I'll just dive right into it. So, Karina Miller, I'm very thankful for this beautiful day and to be here with all of my friends and relatives. My name is Karina Miller, and like it was already said, I served on the Warm Springs Tribal Council from 2016 to 2019. Warm Springs is a Confederated tribe that's located in Central Oregon. We're made up of the Warm Springs, Wasco, and Paiute tribes. We signed a treaty in 1855 and currently have the biggest reservation in Oregon. When I came on to the tribal council, there were a lot of reasons that I started getting into politics within my tribe. And those things really stemmed from the experiences I had at the University of Oregon. I initially went for a journalism degree, but I ended up switching to ethnic studies just because it really helped me understand the world that I grew up in and how my identity had really been shaped, not just by growing up on the reservation, but also by growing up in a rural community in a Republican area of very conservative Oregon and kind of the norms that came along with that. And so a lot of the things that I worked on when I was on tribal council that pertain to this panel about the environment, about natural resources, about our economy, about the way federal policy was set up for us to be in certain relationships with our natural resources, I think I was able to really look at differently because of this lens of ethnic studies and not just having been raised by a family who wanted me to understand why we were so reliant on timber, who wanted me to understand tribal governance, who wanted me to understand really the extreme weight of being a tribal leader and having to navigate these things on local, state, and federal levels, but also understanding that the way we have to operate wasn't our choice. So sorry, I feel like I'm just getting rambling now, but really the reality was I was elected in my 20s. My campaign platforms were a lot about legalizing cannabis, which it's legal in the state of Oregon, but it's still illegal on the reservation, on the Warm Springs reservation. So there were serious concerns I had as a former, I worked at our Children's Protective Services. I worked in Tribal Head Start. I worked in media, and really all these things put together gave me the ability to analyze kind of what was going on in my communities and really see the disparities and the inequality that my community faced because of the internal colonization that really has taken hold in my tribe. And these are shown by the fact that cannabis is still legal. This is shown by the fact that membership has spoken up about wanting to, separate our relationship with natural resources and our economy, but we're forced into that because of trust revenue. Trust revenue is a federal designation of revenue by the Bureau of Indian Affairs that says any revenue where tribes extract natural resources is non-taxable. So for our community, this means that we continue to operate timber companies, even though they're not always environmentally the best decision, even though they're not always the most in line with our tribal traditions and values. This is the way that we have to operate in order to continue to fill our per capitas and pensions, which our community has become reliant on. In the 27th Tribal Council, when I served, it was really unfortunate because two of our major enterprises, including the Canida Resort and our timber mill, both had to be shut down. And the situations were a little bit different for each. Canida, some might know about this because it's a big story here in Oregon, but we just didn't have the money to pay our employees anymore. And so as a tribal council, we were legally bound to notify staff that we were going to have to shut down. With the mill, with our timber mill, which had at one point had us be one of the richest tribes in the nation, we actually had to go into receivership, which meant that we owed millions of dollars to other companies because our mill was so out of date. We had to do so many contracts to send our timber to other mills. So not only, in my opinion, were we not being environmentally friendly, were we not aligning with our tribal values because we were cutting things that weren't turning a profit that they should, we weren't able to put in the kind of restoration that needed to happen all the time. Our resources were just really thinned out in this survival mode, trying to hold up these enterprises that weren't necessarily supporting us for decades. But it also took away from the other areas of our tribe that, in my opinion, need to be the focus, like children's protective services, like education, like housing. Another thing for Warm Springs that we discovered in the 27th Tribal Council was that we had serious water infrastructure issues. And this was something that hadn't been fully known, but our chief operations officer at the time worked with the EPA to discover that we had actually been in non-compliance. And there have been several situations where the community should have been put on a boil water notice. And now in the last 6 years, it's happened multiple times. There are even just a couple weeks ago, our water treatment plant had a fire and there wasn't even water going to multiple neighborhoods in our community. And this is something that our council learned about a term ago now. So what really happened with that is, again, our systems were not set up to be long lasting. They weren't necessarily set up for our tribe to exist into this century. And so we don't have the way local governments are set up to tax water, to tax garbage. That's not the way that we believe. And our council really had these tough choices of whether or not to tax people for water, which is actually the most sacred thing in our religion. And so they just couldn't do it. And there was a lot of conversation around access to state funds, where other communities like the Dalles in Oregon who faced similar infrastructure issues, they were immediately fixed because they had access to state funds that we didn't have access to because we didn't meter or tax our water. But where is that line of sovereignty? Where is that line where we're making our own choices and when we're bending as trustees to the federal government? This came up multiple times, not just in water infrastructure, within education, looking at state funding, looking at federal funding, and within this trust revenue issue. So, sorry, I'm just going to circle all the way back. But the point is that all of these issues keep our community in survival mode. The majority of our resources, of our money, of our attorney time, of our staff time, of our priorities goes towards supporting certain enterprises that at one point really held our tribe up, but actually haven't for decades. And one of those specific things is timber. Not only did we end up millions of dollars in debt and in court for years, but there's actually a fire burning under the old mill site where we demolished that's been burning for almost 6 years now because of all the chemicals that are soaked into that ground. And as long as we're in this receivership and we're still in litigation, we're not able to apply for federal funding to really study or understand how we put these things out. And in my last year of council, I was told this fire would burn for about 100 years and that we just have to let it burn. One thing we did do, sorry, I'm checking my timer. Okay, 5 minutes. One thing we were able to do, and I hope that this can be a nice pass off to Don Sampson here, is he was actually the director of our economic branch, Warm Springs Ventures, when I was able to be on council. And the term before mine on the 26th Tribal Council, they initiated a carbon sequestration project through the California cap and trade market. So by the time I got onto council, they were kind of seeing this project come to fruition. There was a huge chunk of forest that had initially been for, logging that we put up for offset credits through the California market that were eventually sold. And in the end, we ended up making quite a bit more money off of what we did in the carbon market through California than we would have been able to make actually logging that timber. And the wonderful thing is, there's a 100-year lease on those trees now to just sequester carbon. Now, the important thing about what I want people to understand here is this wasn't just an opportunity for us to get new revenue. This was an opportunity for us through the affiliated tribes of Northwest Indians, the regional arm. We also went to the National Congress of American Indians and got resolutions passed there to say that this form of revenue is technically trust revenue, because technically we are extracting carbon from a natural resource, that's timber. And it's these sort of ways that, I'm sorry, I keep going back to ethnic studies, but it's my favorite thing because it gave me that lens and that ability to really recognize the ways that colonization has taken over. That term, that white supremacy doesn't need one white person in the room to be successful. these are the conversations we have to start having that are a little bit more difficult as tribal communities and tribal people. Are the systems that we're in really what's best for us? How do we deconstruct them? How do we take action now to make them more aligned with tribal values and that long-term thinking of the next 7 generations? How do we unravel these economies in times when we're also in survival mode and we don't have the luxury and the privilege to be at the forefront of a lot of these things? This was one way. This was one huge way. And so our tribe actually was very successful in partnering with other tribes such as Umatilla, which is the tribe that Don, I believe, is the executive director for now. Siletz from Oregon, Grand Ron from Oregon. We did a lot of work in the state legislature to support the cap and trade bill, or the clean energy jobs bill, which would have created a carbon market in Oregon, which I don't know if any of you are familiar, but our Republican senators ended up walking out of our legislature a couple times because they didn't want this bill to pass. But it could have been revolutionary for tribes. It could have really meant something for federal policy if we could have pushed it a little further. And I'm still hoping that we will do that. I guess I have like a minute left, but I can go ahead and wrap it up. I'm sorry, I just kind of rambled everywhere, but I wanted to just give a picture of the reality of what tribal governance is like when you open your eyes to face all of the issues. For me, the things that I want our community to be able to tackle are giving more resources to our educators, paying more than federal minimum wage, paying more than state wage, investing in higher education. There's tribes doing these things. I was fortunate to work at Umatilla for their Head Start program. That's where I learned a lot about kind of trauma-informed approaches. I was able to go to school while I was working full-time and be supported with a livable wage. These aren't luxuries that every tribe in Oregon has. And these kind of paths to decoupling economy and environment in these ways and having that deeper understanding of decolonization, I think are how we're going to get there. So thank you for having me. I hope you could understand me. I know my voice is very rough. It's great to see everyone, Don, Shilpa.
Karina, thank you so much for that presentation and for all the work that you do. I'm sure our audience has a lot of questions. We're going to save those questions for now and go to our next panelist. I'm pleased to have Don Sampson, who is the current executive director of the Confederate tribes Umatilla Indians, which is also a position he held back in 2003 to 2010. He oversees all tribal government and business operations with over 1,800 employees. Prior to that, he was the climate change project director for the affiliate tribes of Northwest Indians, a assortment of 57 tribes in the Pacific Northwest. In 2015, he was one of 15 Indigenous representatives for the from North America at the Paris Climate Accords, COP21. Don was also a former executive director of the Institute of Tribal Government from 2012 to 2017, part of the Center of Public Service at Portland State University. Mr. Sampson is also, or was the chairman of the Confederate Tribes Umatilla Indian Reservation in Oregon from 1994 to 1997. He was also the executive director of the Columbia River Intertribal Fish Commission from 1997 to 2003. He's also a enrolled member of his tribe, the Umatilla Indians. Don, thank you so much. And if you guys can join me in welcoming Don to our panel.
Thank you. Good to see everybody. Good to see my friends in Harvard. Karina, good to see you again, as well as Shilpa and all the other panelists that are joining us. Appreciate the time today. My Indian name is Pio Pio Mox Mox. It's Yellowbird. I'm the hereditary chief of the Walla Walla tribe, and I'm a fisheries scientist, but also the director of the tribe. And if I can, I'd like to share my screen. I want to go through some presentation to you, and then of course later ask to have Q&A. So I'll share my screen very quickly. If you can you see that all right?
Don,
Yeah.
we're having a little bit hard time hearing you. I don't know if you could speak up a little bit.
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, that's good. Thank you.
Okay, I'm trying to share my screen. Is that screen share coming up yet?
Yes, we can see it.
Oh, okay, good. So this is a little bit about the affiliate tribes of Northwest Indians. I want to talk about that first, and really the presentation is key because the affiliate tribes are over 60 tribes in the Northwest, which includes Oregon, Washington, Idaho, Northern California, Western Montana, and Southeast Alaska. We have a climate change program there. It's called the Affiliate Tribes of Northwest Indian Climate Change Project. And these are some of the items I want to talk to you all about today. The goals of the project, it started in 2014, is to make sure our member tribes, the 60 member tribes, are engaged and aware of federal, state, tribal, and international climate change programs across the Northwest and the country. Also to coordinate those efforts amongst all the tribes, and also to support our participation at the regional, national, and international policy level. So we work with organizations like the Indigenous Peoples Caucus, which is part of the United Nations. We work with the National Congress of American Indians, and of course, with our local tribes in the Northwest. We also are there to help support the tribes in terms of funding so they can build their capacity to address climate change. Many of you know that, of course, the climate crisis is a huge issue right now. The United Nations report, as you might be aware, was a deafening warning on climate change that we're facing inevitable and irreversible impacts if we don't take action, and that there's really nowhere to run. We've got to do it ourselves, and it's really up to us today to take action. These are some statistics of what's going on in terms of climate and the warming and the impacts that are occurring across the country and the world. And we know that Indigenous people are the frontline communities that are seeing these impacts. We're seeing a lot of things happen already. Impacts to some key plant, animal species, loss of our lands, sea level rise in places from Louisiana up into Alaska to the coast of Washington, in New York, on the Shinnecock Indian Nations lands. We're seeing the impact on our traditional foods, our economy, our spiritual relationship, and our traditional knowledge. So these are things that are happening to us now, and we've been seeing this for over 50 years. So this is not new, and we're something that we're, we really got to take serious action about. Here in the Northwest, we've had catastrophic wildfires. You probably see it on TV all the time. California is always burning up, but here in Oregon, we had catastrophic wildfires, some of the largest that we've seen. In Washington, many of the tribes, the Spokane, the Warm Springs, where Carina's from, the Colville Nation saw some huge catastrophic wildfires, and they're only getting worse. We're seeing the impacts as well in these communities. In this case, some tribal members that don't have insurance to cover damages and replacement of their homes. We're seeing huge fish kills on the Klamath River in Northern California. Here on the Columbia River, where we come from, we call it Intihuana. Our salmon are dying because of lethal temperatures in these reservoirs. There's a series of dams on the Columbia, and behind these dams are these lethal reservoirs that are killing salmon right now. As you can see here, these are projections of what's happening across the globe in terms of catastrophic wildfires with the impacts of climate change. We know that we're going to continue to see that. We saw the horrific fires in Australia, in Brazil, in the Amazon rainforest, and in California. And we're seeing those, and they're going to continue to escalate unless we take action. So what are we doing? We know that we have solutions. Countries around the world must commit to deeper cuts in climate pollution. We've got to stop destroying the ecosystems, and we've got to build our resilient communities The fossil fuel infrastructure and extraction, we've got to stop financing that, from the World Bank to all of the big banks that you probably deal with across the country. But we also think it's important that the tribal indigenous people also lead this effort. And that's really what we're trying to do from our perspective in the tribes in the Northwest. And you'll see great examples from other tribes like Warm Springs and Navajo Nation, the work that they're doing. From our perspective, we have our tribal governments. We have organizations like the Affiliated Tribes of Northwest Indians. Work very closely with United Southern and Eastern Tribes. That's 30 tribes that are from Maine to Florida to Texas. We have worked very closely with them on national policy, tribal policy to address climate change, a number of intertribal organizations and fish commissions. And we also partner with tribal colleges and universities to get their best science and expertise, as well as incorporate traditional ecological knowledge in the work that we do. So where are we at right now in the country? In terms of the tribal governments, there's 574 tribes in the nation. And right now, only about 90, less than a fifth of the tribes have developed some type of adaptation plan or assessment to see what the impacts of climate will be on their local resources and their communities. So we've got a long ways to go. Fortunately, the Biden administration is accelerating these efforts, and we have been working hard to keep things going since Obama. Since the Obama administration started it, we tried to maintain programs with Trump in office, and now we're really accelerating this at the highest level with the Biden administration. But this shows you some of the work that tribes are doing across the country. We've really, in the Northwest, supported tribal governments getting those resources so they can do this. We've helped set national priorities for climate change at the National Congress of American Indians. We helped establish a climate action task force, which is co-chaired by some of our leaders from the Northwest, but also leaders from across the country. Alaska, Arizona, and New York. We've helped increase funding to the tribes to the tune of $61 million. We started only with about $600,000 in 2013, but the tribes need those resources in order to respond to the climate and plan for the climate impacts they're seeing right now. We're also moving to start a tribal civilian climate corps. We allocated, we had Congress allocate 10 million for that, 11 million for Alaska villages. There's a number of Alaska villages who are now having to relocate because of sea level rise and storm surge. There's also funds available to help them for relocation. The Quinault, Ho, and Quileute tribe are 3 tribes on the northwest part of Washington that are working on relocating a lot of their village and their communities from the mouth of the river or along the sea. We also do work with tribes. We develop curriculum with some of the top tribal scientists, traditional knowledge holders, to make sure that tribes follow a great strategy, which is really indigenous based on looking at the vulnerability of their communities, engaging their communities effectively, looking at tribal and international policy, of course, the climate science, but more importantly for us, making sure that we incorporate our traditional knowledge in our climate change planning and initiatives. These are some of the places that we've hosted these across the Northwest. We have one coming up in Seward, Alaska. We're working with Alaskan Native corporations and villages there. But we have done this throughout the Northwest. And really the idea is to be able to have tribes learn from each other, a peer-to-peer process to learn from their approaches to dealing with climate impacts. These are some of our initial groups up in Idaho. Again, traditional food gatherers and knowledge holders, along with tribal scientists and elders. Another one we did with the Nisqually tribe in Washington. We also included the United Nations sent their program to learn about how our indigenous people in the Northwest were incorporating their knowledge. So we had people from the Philippines and from Samoa come to our, and also from Maori from New Zealand to learn about the work that we're doing here in the Northwest. We had another one in Flathead Lake, Montana. Again, tribal leaders from across the country. We had Seminole tribe there. We had the Penobscot Nation. We had Navajo Nation. A lot of folks were coming to these events to participate, to learn from each other on how we adapt and really begin to change what's going on right now in our communities. We've also done national summits, and this is very important. This is the Fawn Sharp. She's the president of National Congress of American Indians, but also we had some of our U.S. members of Congress from Oregon, the governor of Washington, leaders that are on dealing with the United Nations, the governor from Gila River. So we had all of these folks talking about really at the policy level, how can tribes really engage on climate policy with the US government, but also how do we make sure that we take action with this new administration, particularly with Biden administration. And so we've got a really focused effort to make that happen. We've done others on resiliency. The representative at the time, Deb Haaland, now Secretary of Interior, of course, has taken a huge stand on getting tribes prepared to address climate change and really focusing on those efforts. We work with groups that, like the Blue Lake Rancheria, who have really transitioned from fossil fuels to renewable energy, particularly with solar. And now they're probably 80% of their power supply in the Blue Lake Rancheria, which is in Northern California, is from solar power. So we're sharing these ideas with each other and learning from each other. We also had another one with Indigenous youth, and that's the key, is empowering Indigenous youth so that they're the new leaders of the climate movement. And we've got some very powerful Indigenous youth leaders as part of our effort that we work. And these are national summits. So we'll be doing another one this upcoming summer and fall, and we'd love to have folks from Harvard and those who are on the line participate in that upcoming summit. And last, how we preserve and incorporate our traditional knowledge into our climate resiliency and how we adapt and address those very sacred, important foods that we rely on. At the local level in the region, we work very closely with the Washington tribes for what was called the Climate Commitment Act. It was a cap and invest system that is an economy-wide cap on greenhouse gas emissions, really reducing by 95% by 2050. And so the tribes were critical in making that happen. Without the tribal governments, that legislation wouldn't have passed. And there's money earmarked for tribal governments for investments in their communities for renewable energy, for projects that will restore ecosystems, as well as address drought conditions, hazardous fires, wildfires, etc. In Washington, I was fortunate to work with Shilpa, with Renew Oregon, as well as with Carina on what was now called the Oregon Climate Action Plan. We worked with the governor to establish an executive order and implement that executive order over the past couple of years, and now it's in place, and it's really designed to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in the state of Oregon. There's also funds that are earmarked for the 9 tribes of Oregon to invest in renewable energy and efforts to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in their communities and on the reservations. Clean buildings, climate equity, we're making sure that the tribes have a seat at the table in terms of decisions on how these strategies will be guided and the investments will be made in our Indigenous communities in Oregon. At the national level, we work very closely with what was called the Congressional Action Plan on the Climate Crisis. Basically, Nancy Pelosi appointed a bipartisan committee to take action and develop strategies. We formulated a strategy with the National Congress of American Indians and about 100 different tribal representatives to review that plan and come up with our own recommendations, identify gaps, and that's what we did. We presented this, and that is going to be the basis for what the National Congress of American Indians is now going to develop as far as a national strategy across Indian country. It's of course the action plan sets net zero carbon by 2050. And then after that, a net negative emission, really that's something we're continuing to push. It has a number of recommendations on policies, and we looked at how that affect our tribes. This a picture is from my own reservation where we had catastrophic flooding events that wiped out a lot of our community. And so we've got to be able to respond to this now. We had a core team, 33 tribal scientists, individuals that did the review of that. 106 individuals from 97 tribes participated in it. So the bottom line is tribes are getting organized and collectively using their voice and power to set climate policy at the national level. Some of the key themes in terms of socio-economic resilience of tribes, the environmental and climate justice issues that we're facing, recognizing tribal sovereignty, making sure that the ecology and from the ecological perspective, we're protecting critical habitats as well as foods that are important to us, and also making sure that traditional ecological knowledge is respected and incorporated into the work we're doing. So we're continuing to do this work at the regional level through resolutions, and these are basically like laws from our regional organization. We bring those up to the National Congress of American Indians. We adopt those resolutions, and we help then develop policy at that level. And so that's some of the work that we continue to do, and we're very excited that folks from NCI are part of this panel. But the work that we have yet to do is really continue our strategies with the Biden administration to support the tribe's resiliency across the country. And so this is really what we're trying to develop is the Climate Crisis Action Plan, which will collaborate with tribal nations and build upon the recommendations we developed at ATNI for the Congressional, Executive, and International Climate Crisis Action Plan. So we're working at all different levels in the US government and then at the United Nations. So I'll stop there and see, really want to thank you all for allowing me to present. There is an event coming up, Native Youth Climate Adaptation Leadership Congress. It's coming up in June, July, and unfortunately the deadline's passed, but if there's an opportunity for anybody to track that or perhaps get involved, I'd be happy to help connect you all. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Don. Don, thank you so much for that presentation. I know I have a few questions for that, but we'll hold those questions until after. We're lucky to have two more panelists. They actually work together. They're in the Navajo Nation, and so I'm gonna go ahead and introduce them both at the same time, and then I'll hand it over to them to kind of split up their 15 minutes, how they want to structure their presentation. But with that, we are joined by Nicholas Chischilly. He is a wildlife technician for the Navajo Nation Climate Change Program, working directly with the Navajo communities to help assist them in adapting to climate change. Nicholas is Diné and he is the Water Flows Together clan, born for Red Running into the Water People clan. He received his bachelor's degree from Fort Lewis College there in Colorado, and has experienced multiple academic internships, research experiences in his undergrad degree. Nicholas continues to be intrigued by our environments and natural processes. Our next panelist is Kevin Howard. Kevin Howard is a wildlife technician in the climate change program at the Navajo Nation, working with the Department of Fish and Wildlife. Keith is a member of the Navajo Nation. He represents his mother's clan, which is Red Running into the Water People, and was born for his father's clan, the Water Flows Together people. Growing up on the Navajo reservation, Howard lived a simple life and cared for his family's livestock, Later, he acquired his undergraduate degree from in environmental science and natural resources from Navajo Technical University. Please join me in welcoming our panelists.
Thank you for the awesome introduction. Yeah, thank you for, first I'd like to thank you guys, all collaborators and organizers and the other panelists on inviting us to speak to this. Me and Keith are very excited to share what we know and just happy to be here. Thank you for this opportunity. I don't know if Keith wants to say anything before we get started.
Oh, yeah, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you again, the panelists, the participants. Thank you for all coming together and hearing some of these stories and some of these topics related to climate change and the climate crisis occurring across Indigenous land. And I'd just like to briefly introduce myself. And thank you, and let's go ahead and get started.
Yes, I'd like to briefly introduce myself as well. Nicholas Chischilly and Inshia, Toek Leaning and Shne, Tachini Bashishi, Tora Kojo Dashache, Tora Chini Dashanella. And we organized Google Slides for you guys. So if I can get the ability to share my screen, we should get started. We can get started. Here we go. Can everybody see my screen? Awesome, awesome. So like me and Keith said in our bios, we work for the Navajo Nation Climate Change Program, which is a intergovernmental entity underneath Navajo Nation Fish and Wildlife. And we're here to talk about the adaptation plan, drought on the Navajo Nation, as well as what we're trying to do to help our communities adapt to climate change. So a little bit of brief history on the resource extraction on Navajo Nation. A lot of in the 1940s to the 1960s, a lot of uranium mining occurred on the Navajo Nation, which was then followed by Peabody coal mine, which was established on the Navajo Nation. And in the 1979, the Church Rock, New Mexico uranium mill spill happened, which was the largest uranium spill in history of the United States. It was 1,100 tons of uranium waste and 94 million gallons of radioactive water seeped into the nearby Porco River. And I'd just like to state this because our Navajo Nation a lot of resource extraction throughout the history of its sovereignty and its operation or its existence as us as a tribe. And that has led to a lot of health effects and rapid rise and fall of our economy. So with these introductions of these resource extraction operations, we see a huge boom in economy. And then once these corporations leave, we see a huge decline in our economy. So we're left cleaning up their mess, essentially. And I like to preface it with what's going on now ecologically in the Southwest. So right now we're going through a mega drought, is a term that scientists are using because that explains the extent of our drought in the Southwest right now. It's off the categories that were preset to show the to explain the effects of the drought in the Southwest right now. And that's been going on since the late 1990s. And so that shows the long-term drying trend in on the Navajo Nation. It shows decreasing snowpack on the Navajo Nation. And I'd like to give you this little, or this image of Lake Powell, and that shows as a good visual indicator of what's happening on the entire Southwest landscape. Overall, we're experiencing desertification process taking over the landscape across the Southwest, and us as a climate change program, we're working hard at trying to help our communities adapt to this ongoing drought. And so with that being said, the Navajo Nation took it upon themselves, and specifically Navajo Nation Fish and Wildlife, our Department of Fish and Wildlife created the climate change program in 2018. And we also published the climate adaptation plan the same year. And this adaptation plan was a BIA funded, and its main goal was to help our communities adapt to climate change. The initial step was to educate our communities on what's happening globally and as a reservation as a whole, because a lot of our communities live in rural places, and it's hard to get access to a lot of the resources that people in cities and people elsewhere not living in rural areas have. And so with this adaptation plan, we try to get more people on board and understand and comprehend the complexities of climate change globally and also locally. And that helps us to get on the same page for a lot of restoration work, a lot of climate change workshops, and so much more that we can expand into within our immediate and surrounding communities. The reasons, especially because drought has hit the Navajo Nation extremely hard, and this is why we outlined our 6 priority points within our adaptation plan. So number 1 was water, number 2 is feral horses, number 3 is communication, 4 enforcement and compliance, 5 pollution, air quality, and legal dumping, and grazing management. And I'd like to say that this adaptation plan was signed off by our Navajo Nation Council, so it's a great resource for our people and other tribes to take a look at. And from this, our tribal leadership saw the importance of looking into, saw the importance of talking to and conversing with our communities on what they saw in their local area. One of our major accomplishments was the RDC Drought Tour, and the RDC stands for the Resources and Development Committee of the 24th Navajo Nation Council. So they're council delegates within our Navajo Nation Council. And we acted as kind of like tour guides, chauffeuring them around Navajo Nation, going to different communities, kind of being that, lack of a better term, like tour guide, or not, I guess not tour guide, but showing them what different departments and organizations are doing within their communities to help actively remediate and adapt to climate change. I personally took this as I guess kind of like a healing tour. I guess going back onto what some of the other panelists said, because when we discuss the natural world as Indigenous people, we're talking about our identity, and a lot of people stress the importance of the environment in our day-to-day lives, and that's how we create our livelihoods. And so within this tour, it brought up a lot of emotions and deep discussions of what Ms. Miller said, survival essentially. Because of the droughts that we're in, it's extremely difficult to make a living, and it's extremely difficult on the spirit, mind, physically, everything. And so it's essentially survival. And a lot of these communities express their concerns to our council leaders. So in our work, we have to work carefully, but also intentional in a lot of the work that we do. And so a little bit about what we saw on the RDC Drought Tour. Our program as a whole is trying to move into ecological restoration, and some of the techniques we use for this ecological restoration incorporates a lot of low-tech restoration techniques, because we don't want to leave that big of an impact on the land. So we don't incorporate a lot of heavy machinery and we take deliberate actions. So here's a few examples of what we do. Beaver Dam Analogs, one rock dam structures, deferring domesticated feral livestock and more. But now Keith will go into what it looks like at those locations and other initiatives the Navajo Nation is looking into. Thank you.
Next slide. So here we have a snap picture or snapshot of what we call Zuni bowls. And the picture on your left, the before picture, shows, an area that's been devastated by overgrazing and, the lack of moisture. And so the picture on the left, can you turn your, oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, go ahead. I'm sorry. So the picture on the right shows the after, within 1 year's time, the vegetation starts to grow back. These Zuni bowls serve as a erosion control device, and they're low tech. And go ahead, next slide. And here's another snapshot of low tech the strategy, the Beaver Dam Analogs. And you build these low tech structures, you get what the environment has to offer. So a lot of these materials are gathered from the surrounding area. You have like old logs, old brush, and the purpose of these Beaver Dam analogs is to encourage backwatering and more frequent overbank flooding, in turn recharging shallow groundwater and increasing groundwater storage. These Beaver Dam analogs during the peak flows detain floodwaters and spread higher flows across a floodplain surface. So as you can see in this picture, before and after, and within 1 year's time. Go ahead, next slide, please, Nick. And here's a beautiful picture of, what a one rock dam can do. So another low tech structure that can be built, using the items that Mother Nature provides. For instance, just rocks. So, a low grade control structure built with a single layer of rock on the bed of a channel. One rock dam stabilized the bed of the channel by slowing the flow of water, increasing roughness and recruiting vegetation, capture sediment, and gradually raising the bed level over time. So again, it's a really good sight to see, how if you take the time, the effort, and the initiative to, put in the work, get your boots wet, get your hands dirty, and using what Mother Nature has to offer, you can bring a land that's been devastated by overgrazing and by drought, and start to bring those lands back. And go ahead, next slide, please. So those are some, initiatives that we have been taking in our restoration projects across the Navajo Nation. And other initiatives that, our people, our government, our nation are, implementing and are in the early talks, are like in 2019, the Navajo Hayo-Koth project, also known as the Navajo Sunrise Proclamation, was signed. It promotes renewable energy development to reduce our dependency on fossil fuels. So for instance, our nation has been establishing solar panel farms across the reservation, and we have like 5 or 6 that have been built. And there's the possibility of the wind farms and other alternative energies that we want to establish on the reservation. And then again, in 2019, the Resource and Development Committee approved legislation to start discussions with the Native American Venture Fund for potential carbon sequestration within our Navajo forests and now in grasslands, to come up with ideas and ways to replant the trees, replant the forests, reseeding our lands with native vegetation, and to help capture some of that carbon buildup that's up in the atmosphere. Next slide, Nick. And so, to bring it all together, with Navajo philosophy, Navajo education, it's Nasahakis Nahata Ina Sihasin. Nasahakis is thinking, brainstorming, and Nahata is planning, Ina is life, and Sihasin is reflection. So, you think about an idea, what's affecting our reservation in relation to climate change, for instance, drought. So we start brainstorming about that issue. Then we start planning about that issue. Where do we start? Getting professional people together. Our political leaders, our elected grazing officials, farm board, land board officials, BIA, anybody that has some inkling or some idea or some professional guidance in how to, prioritize and structure a certain issue related to drought. And then, we start putting that plan into life. So like, for instance, restoration, just like how you've seen how those low tech structures kind of brought life back into the land, brought water back to the land. And then reflection, making adjustments. Is it working? Is it not working? Is there a different approach we need to take? So all that encompass, to come together and, to bring our lands and our earth, our Mother Earth back together and to begin the healing process. Throughout the day, you hear people that talk, the panelists, we need to stop asking and to go out there and get our hands dirty and do the work ourselves and see the outcome. And go ahead, next slide. So with that, I'd just like to say thank you to the panelists, Harvard Kennedy School, and it's I wish we had a lot of more time to talk, but thank you, and we'll wait for the questions.
Thank you, Keith. Thank you, Nick. Thank you guys for the work that you guys do. And right now we're going to go ahead and turn it over to a Q&A. And we have
Great, thank you so much. Jennifer Spence, I'm with the Arctic Initiative at Harvard Kennedy School. And my question is, we heard in the first panel today in terms of climate activism. No, it's because, well, yeah, it's when, yeah. How important it is that climate action happens at the community level. And I think that your presentations have really demonstrated the importance of that community level work in terms of what it means to actually make the change that needs to happen. I guess my question is for Dawn, but also for any of you is, so if we're looking for community action and that's really what we need to empower, what is the role of regional and national policy in this? And even international policy, how can those other levels enable the local to really be the drivers of this?
Well, I'll take a cut at that from a, like, let's say, look at the tribe and the state level. So in Oregon and Washington, the tribes were instrumental in advancing policy that put a cap on greenhouse gas emissions from the state of Oregon, or economy-wide in the state of Washington. Those are significant policies. And I think that the 29 tribes in Washington were key to making that a success and getting that legislation passed. Now they will be in a role of implementing that, which means making sure that state agencies are monitoring the reductions in transportation sector, in industrial sector, in the energy sector, all across the economy of Washington, and also be receiving significant investments, you know, to the tune of possibly $500 million annually to the 29 tribes in Washington. They'll be able to use those at the local level, just similar to what Keith and Nick were showing, and even what Karina was talking about, sequestering carbon, transitioning from gas and diesel vehicles to electric fleets, implementing solar for commercial and residential in their communities. You know, the Kiente 1 and 2 that Navajo Nation has done, each project will power 36,000 homes each. So imagine the ability to get the resources, number one, to do that. The tribes currently don't have those resources, but in this case, that type of policy at a state level is translating into action on the ground and will support the community level. At the national level, of course, the infrastructure legislation that the Biden administration is moving forward, we're trying to gear that up to fund directly to the tribal government so that they can actually do the same thing as what was discussed by Keith and Nick. And so there's a lot of different approaches to that. And even at the international level, there's a number of funds that are available to developing countries, indigenous people in developing countries that are able to use some of that international green fund to invest in climate resiliency, similar to what was proposed here. So that's what I see at 3 different levels. At the tribal level, we really need to develop our own greenhouse gas emission goals and make those consistent with what we've seen, or maybe even more aggressive, or likely more aggressive than what we saw at Paris, what we've seen so far in any legislature in the country. I think tribal nations can also identify what they call their indigenous determined contributions. So these are what they call IDCs. Every country that is part of the Paris Accord has to determine how much greenhouse gas reductions they're going to contribute to the overall global reduction strategy. Indigenous tribes can do the same. So those are kind of actionable approaches that I think can benefit local communities.
Karina, did did anybody else want to add to that? Karina, Keith, or Nick?
I mean, I think Don covered a lot of it as far as how is activism, from what I understand, the question is, how is activism kind of intersecting on these like national or even international policies when it comes to tribal issues? I think, you know, it's hard for me to not be too controversial, because I think a big part of stepping forward with this is recognizing that there's been a lot of intertribal politics that have been set up, especially in places like Oregon, where a lot of the times what ends up happening is we end up fighting over pieces of the pie instead of making more pies. And so an example of this sort of thing is just literally erasure. I didn't understand that term until I was at least in college, and it's not something that even people in my community understand. But when we talk about erasure, this still happens in like state policy on the level where if we're doing land management in ceded territories or traditional territories, we can co-manage with the state, we can co-manage with different state agencies or federal agencies, but we don't co-manage with other tribes. So why are these systems set up for us to always be pit against each other? Things like carbon sequestration, things like net zero building or green renewable energy give tribes the opportunity to not only come together and get rid of this idea of intertribal politics, but have real conversations about it and think of new ways to go forward. I am a Columbia River Gorge Commissioner. That's a federal commission. That's a 2-state commission that's appointed by Oregon and the state of Washington. And right now there's 3 tribal people serving on the 11 commission, all of us, Washington and Oregon. So this has been a unique opportunity to not only have multiple tribes coming together that have usually been pitted against each other on the Columbia River, but we're actually at the table crafting the policy. Don was talking about the Clean Energy Jobs bill. He actually was one of the people who got me a seat at that table when I was on council, to not only be having the conversations about how state and federal policy have traditionally pit tribes against each other in these ways with economy or with land management or with erasure, or who has a right to that land or who has a right to do what with natural resources, but it actually put us at the table to craft state policy and to get set asides and be proactive, thinking about the ways we want our tribal economies to be, not just existing in the way that they have. I hope that's as clear as mud.
Hello, thank you so much for being here today. I'm Liza Sanderman. I'm a master in public policy. Oh, no, it's perfect. Hi. I have come from Scandinavia. I come from Denmark, and have mainly been thinking about a lot of these questions in the context of the Kalalit, so the Greenland and the native communities we have within Scandinavia. And I was really moved and touched by what you were talking about, Karina, about these perverse incentives around resource exploitation that's often linked together with economic independence or empowerment. And I guess in the context of Greenland, which is the one I'm mostly familiar with, this is often linked with, well, the trade-off of economic independence to resource exploitation and environmental protection. And I was interested in just hearing a little bit more, and maybe also from Nick, in terms of those dynamics and how it plays out with those national incentives around resource exploitation, and how we can really align that on the path of climate protection. But Karina, I think it was mainly addressed to you.
Okay. Just a nice, easy, light question. I think it comes back to what Nick touched on, what we've talked about a lot about survival. Again, my background that really inspired me to go into leadership stems from being a social worker in my community. It stems from being a Head Start teacher. It stems from having an ethnic studies degree and really understanding what we've been conditioned to believe and accept as our regular lives. And so for me, when I was a tribal leader, the way I measured community health wasn't just the surface numbers of unemployment, wasn't just, the surface numbers of how much housing we needed, of looking at health statistics, these sort of things. It was literally the relationships that aren't quantifiable in my community. Is my generation speaking our language? Is my generation having access to our first foods or healthy relationships with our elders? Or are we embracing colonial ideas like blood quantum and becoming the oppressor that has had their boot on our neck for so many generations? These are really difficult conversations to have. But when you really study federal Indian policy, it is heartbreaking. Not only how clear it is that this federal government was enacting genocide on our people, but the reality of how effective it has also been. And so these are the things that in my community, I'm half white, but I grew up in a very traditional family. My dad's full-blooded. I was raised to understand who I was and where I belong. I understand now that's a privilege that a lot of people in my community don't have. And we need to have these conversations where we really unpack these histories and ask ourselves, how are we measuring health? Whose lens, whose idea? Is it just money? Is it just jobs? Or is it these relationships with food and spirituality and language and other things that this constant survival mode keeps us from having the privilege to prioritize. I know that I have one of the best jobs, one of the healthiest families, one of the best support systems in my community, and I struggle to just survive. So I can't imagine, knowing what I know about the rest of my community, how it is for so many other mothers, so many other people who aren't able to have their kids be enrolled, who aren't able to go into the longhouse and always feel welcome. It's, you know, these higher level conversations about environmental policy or decoupling economy. That's to get our community out of survival mode. That's to get it so all our resources aren't spent on playing defense on where we belong and where we don't belong, who has control, but so we can start focusing on that trauma-informed piece, on the mental health piece, on the education piece. Are we teaching our youth how to decolonize, how to really look at curriculum and systems at a young age? Or are we allowing this cycle where these normalized kind of racist, a lot of times internalized colonization beliefs just exist because it's easier to just survive than it is to fight them?
Thank you so much, Karina. That was very inspirational. Next question.
Okay, so this one's less academic, definitely more personal. Whenever we were talking earlier about the uranium spills and all of those kinds of disasters, these are events that are not your fault, that have now become your problem to at least some extent. My question is, how do you navigate that you're cleaning up other people's messes and you're probably tired? Just a general reaction to the mess of, I don't know, blame and fatigue. I'm just going to stop, but general reactions, please. Thank you.
Well, we've been doing that for about 500 years, so it's nothing new to us. Hey, get it? Hey. You know, I would say in our community, in our place along the river, you know, we've been doing this for a long time, and so, you know, we're probably you know, since the 1850s at least out here in the Columbia, we've been trying to deal with over you know, clear cutting of forest lands, damming of rivers. So all of that stuff is something we've been on the forefront for the last 7 or 8 generations intensely, and more we've been able to really, number one, use our legal rights. The treaties that we have with the United States government guarantee certain protection. I call them the first environmental laws in the country, or treaties that tribes reserved rights to protect the lands, the water, the resources. And so for us, we've used those legal rights to protect not only just those rights we reserve in the foods, et cetera, but also to benefit every other American in the country for clean water, for healthy fish, all of that stuff. So it's something we have to deal with, you know, on a regular basis. So I guess we're used to it.
Keith, Nick, did you guys have any reaction?
Yeah, I guess a question I can feel comfortable answering. I'm just kidding. But me, I'm coming from a younger perspective, I guess. A lot of the other panelists earlier were younger, and I could relate to a lot of the the things they were saying. I'm only 24 years old, so trying to navigate working within the tribal government, and also growing up with going to school, growing up listening to my parents, my grandparents talk about the troubles they had, and knowing the history of our nation and our people, our culture, our traditions. It kind of creates this, I don't know how to describe it. It's an inner dilemma within our youth, because it's trying to think and talk at the same time, and it's not working. We're trying to move on to moving forward and reclaiming our culture and reclaiming our traditions, but it's becoming more and more difficult as climate change moves forward, and we're losing that traditional ecological knowledge. So it's like we're trying to do two things at once, but also find our own identities within ourselves. And me growing up with my dad, he teaches environmental science at a tribal college. You get that kind of not necessarily doom and gloom kind of feeling growing up and learning about environment and the devastations that people in general, five-fingered beings, have done to this world and how we're trying to reclaim it and the restoration work that we do. That's also why I said that RDC Drought Tour was kind of like a healing tour for me, because I found relatives in that canyon that we were restoring. That goes back to the teaching of within our Navajo traditions and family and connections. And that's why me and Keith introduced ourselves. That's our identity, that's our clans, that's how we identify each other, and that's how we relate to each other. And so growing up within this field is kind of like you're thrown into the pool without knowing how to swim. And it gets a little scary sometimes, but it's necessary in order to, like, I want to have kids someday. And so moving forward, you kind of have to do that, take that step, take that leap, and take charge of what you know and who you are as a person and feel comfortable with it, and kind of run with it. So me being, I guess, generally young within Navajo Nation government and in this line of work, it feels like I'm looking for these little bits and pieces of hope, because it's what's needed in order for, Indigenous people to move forward, because we, like Mr. Sampson said, we have been dealing with it. We've been born into it. We've been brought up in it. It's kind of like, it kind of goes back to the other panelists, like, why are you guys so negative? Why are you guys never positive about things? And so it's like, we just don't know. I mean, it's just what we were brought up in. And so it's tough navigating those systems and those avenues of trying to be an educated individual, but also relating to your communities, while also knowing your culture, while also trying to find yourself. And so all these other complexities go into it, with the complexities of climate change. So I don't know if I made my answer more complicated than it needed to be, but that's just my perspective.
Yeah, thank you so much. That was a great response and very powerful. And I thank you guys so much for. Okay. Sorry about that. Thank you guys so much. We are near time, and so I want to be respectful of everybody's time, of our panelists and everybody here in the room. But can we all just give them a round of applause? I know there's some remaining questions. We didn't get to all of them, but would it be okay with you guys if we send some of those questions to you? Can we share your contact information with those that have remaining questions? All right, great. Well, thank you guys so much again. And with that, I'll hand it over to Vic.
Good to see you guys. Hey, Nick, tell your dad, Steve, I said hi. Keith, good to see you. Karina, good to see you. And Shilpa, yay. Good to see you. Miss you a lot. Hope to see you soon.
All right, and panelists, feel free to stick around for the closing remarks too, if you want to. No pressure though. Yeah, I mean, for the folks that are still around who spoke or have been here all day, for the audience members, I just want to say that I'm not really sure how to express my gratitude right now, particularly for the folks over Zoom with the virtual barrier and all of that. But I hope that if you came to the event today without too much knowledge on this topic, or maybe you're just coming to learn something new, that you're leaving with an understanding that climate change for Indigenous peoples and Indigenous communities is deeply personal. It's a personal threat that we don't hear enough about in the common discourse about the climate crisis. And And just for some personal remarks to kind of close out the day, I want to say that when I came to HKS, and I learned this recently, that when Joel came to HKS as well, we were both told that we were the only Native person in our classes and in the school, which I've found out recently is not true, but that's like a whole other conversation to have. And when we think of the US has 4 levels of government. We've got city, we've got state, we've got federal, and we also have tribal governments. And in my required classes here as a Master of Public Policy graduate student, I'm not required to take any classes that teach me about tribal government. I haven't learned about tribal government in any of my core classes here. I say this for 2 reasons. One is that the perspectives that we heard today are that much more important and valuable because there are so few opportunities that we have here at HKS to learn from Indigenous leaders on the issues that they brought up today. And the second reason is because I hope that Harvard and HKS will expand the resources available for us to continue this conversation. Across virtual and in person for this event, we had over 200 registrants, which is incredible to see that there's the interest and that clearly from the attendance in this room and from what we saw online today, people want to learn about these things. And I hope that we can continue to do that. I also wanted to say that you heard 2 sides of the story today. One is that the climate crisis for Indigenous communities in many ways is literally life or death. I mean, it's about the continuation of cultures and communities being able to exist on their land. It's about people being able to continue speaking their languages, practicing their ceremonies that they've practiced for forever. And so it's serious, and I want us to sit with that and not be afraid to look at that. And then on the other hand, we've heard from Indigenous leaders all day about their resistance in climate and education initiatives, innovation around carbon credits, academic work on Indigenous ecological sciences, art, narrative creation. And this is only one tiny window of all of the work that is going on globally. So we're in this institution that is globally recognized. And I urge you to continue connecting and continuing this conversation and at all opportunities in our workplaces and our classrooms, trying to bring Indigenous voices to the forefront. And so to keep some of these conversations going, I have some announcements about events coming up in the future. And these go for both in-person and virtual events. So for the in-person ones only, I'm sorry, to the virtual attendees. The first is the Harvard project, the American Indian Project on Economic Development is hosting an event in person here on Monday, the 4th, this upcoming Monday at 6. And it's called Indigenous, Black, and Communities of Color Fighting for Environmental Justice. And I believe that Brittany has just shared the link for that in the virtual space for folks to tune in. I think it will also be recorded, but check that out. I highly encourage you to look into that. And we're going to have some other incredible speakers who we wanted to come speak at this event, but they're already speaking on Monday. The next event I'll mention is the HUNAP Annual Lecture, where David Truer will be presenting on the trouble with tragedy, the Native American past, present, and future. On Thursday, April 14th at 6 p.m. at the Harvard Art Museum. That link has also just been shared in the chat on the webinar, and we'll be sharing all of these things out in an email post this event. And the last one that I'll share is one that's being co-sponsored by the student-led Indigenous Caucus here at HKS, which is one to honor missing and murdered Indigenous peoples on May 5th. That will be from 3 to 4:30. It'll be an open mic at the Harvard Medical School happening right in front of the school. And again, we'll be sharing information about that after this. So finally, I want to say one final thank you to our panelists, to our moderators, and to our organizers. And I want to give a special shout out to some specific individuals, Jen, Brittany, and Elizabeth from the Belfer Center. Thank you so much for everything you've done. I also want to shout out Shilpa, Isaac, Leah, Haley, Tess, Joel, and all of the other members of the Indigenous Caucus here that have made this happen. I'm very grateful to be a part of this community, and I look forward to what is to come in the future. And I hope that everyone has a wonderful weekend. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Vic. You're the best. Vic pulled this together, had the idea. Yeah, big thank you to Vic.
For in-person attendees, sorry, virtual attendees, just close your ears right now. Join us in the courtyard after this for free beer, wine, and non-alcoholic beverages at Quorum Call. Yeah, we're hosting Quorum Call, whatever that means.
If you're interested in joining the Indigenous and Native Caucus, we meet every Friday at 12:30 somewhere in HKS, but it changes. We'll send it out. Thank you.